Imagine one single construction project that did all of this. It connected two oceans and cut shipping time in half for the entire planet. It cost more money than building all the skyscrapers in New York City at the time. Combined, it took over 27,000 lives. It helped turn the United States into a global superpower. It started a revolution in a country that didn't even exist when the project began. And it still earns billions of dollars every single year, more than 100 years later. That project is the Panama Canal. Most people think it was just a big ditch that America dug in the early 1900s. The real story is way bigger and way more dramatic. It starts with the biggest corporate failure in French history, continues with the United States president basically creating a new country to get what he wanted, and ends with one of the greatest engineering wins of all time. There were massive mistakes, deadly diseases, huge landslides, political tricks, and thousands of workers who never gave up. This is the true story of how 80 kilometers of water changed the world forever. We're going to tell it in 7 chapters, split into 14 parts, so you can follow every step of the journey. Buckle up. You're about to see how the Panama Canal actually happened. Chapter 1. In the late 1800s, going from the Atlantic Ocean to the Pacific Ocean by ship was a huge pain. If you were in New York and wanted to get to San Francisco, you had 2 choices. 1. Sail all the way down South America, around the dangerous Cape Horn, a 14,000-mile trip that could take 2 months and sometimes wrecked ships in giant storms. Or 2. Unload your cargo in Panama, drag it 80 kilometers across jungle and mountains on mules and trains, then reload it on another ship on the Pacific side. Both ways were slow, expensive, and risky. Everyone dreamed of a shortcut, a canal straight through the narrowest part of Central America. The first big country to try was France. France had just finished the Suez Canal in 1869. That canal connected the Mediterranean Sea to the Red Sea and made shipping between Europe and Asia much faster. The man who led that project was a famous French engineer named Ferdinand de Lesseps. People called him a hero. In 1879, de Lesseps went to Paris and told a giant crowd, "If we can dig through the desert for Suez, we can dig through Panama for an even greater canal." Investors went wild. Rich people, middle-class families, even small shop owners, poured money in. In just a few months, the new company called the Compagnie Universelle du Canal Interoceanique raised the 2024 equivalent of about $1.5 billion. That was more money than most countries had in their treasuries. The plan sounded simple: dig a canal at sea level, no locks, no steps. Make it 80 kilometers long from Colon on the Atlantic side to Panama City on the Pacific side. Finish in about 8 to 10 years. Make everyone rich with tolls from ships. De Lesseps promised the canal would open in 1888 and start paying big dividends right away. The first ships full of workers and machines left France in early 1881. Thousands of men arrived, ready to make history. They had no idea what they were walking into. The jungle, the rain, the mountains, and the mosquitoes were about to teach the world one of the hardest lessons in engineering history. The French arrived in Panama full of confidence. They brought the best machines money could buy: giant steam shovels, locomotives, dredgers, even a huge floating crane. Newspapers back home printed drawings of beautiful marble entrances and statues that would line the finished canal. But within weeks, everything started going wrong. First, the weather. Panama gets over 3 meters of rain every year. Most of it between May and December. The ground turns into thick, sticky mud. Machines sink up to their axles. Freshly dug trenches fill with water overnight. Railway tracks twist and disappear under landslides. Second, the land itself. The route crosses the Chagres River more than 50 times. That river looks calm in the dry season, but in the rainy season it can rise 12 meters in a single night and wash away entire camps. The biggest challenge is the Culebra Cut, a 14-kilometer section where workers have to slice through a mountain range. The rock there is not solid. It's soft clay that turns into liquid when wet and slides back into the hole almost as fast as men can dig it out. Third, and worst of all, the diseases. 2 illnesses killed far more workers than accidents ever did: yellow fever and malaria. Both are carried by mosquitoes that breed in every puddle. In the early years, there was no good medicine, and no one even understood how the diseases spread. A healthy man could wake up fine, have chills by lunch, and be dead 3 days later. At the peak in 1884 to 1885, the death rate hit 200 to 300 workers per month. Engineers on site kept sending urgent reports to Paris. "We need locks to lift ships over the mountains instead of digging everything down to sea level. We need better drainage. We need mosquito screens and quinine." Ferdinand de Lesseps refused to listen. He kept telling investors everything was on schedule. He even fired engineers who spoke up too loudly. By 1887, the company had spent today as equivalent of almost $7 billion, and the canal was less than 30% finished. Machines were rusting in the jungle. Workers hadn't been paid in months. New men arriving from France took one look and got straight back on the ship home. In 1888, the money finally ran out completely. The company stopped all work. Thousands of unpaid workers rioted. The French government had to send warships to evacuate their own citizens. In December 1888, the company Universelle declared bankruptcy. It was the biggest corporate failure in history up to that point. More than 800,000 French investors lost everything. Families who had put their life savings into safe canal shares were ruined. Ferdinand de Lesseps, the hero of Suez, was charged with fraud for hiding the truth. He was too old and sick to go to prison, but his name was destroyed. He died broken in 1894. The French left behind 22,000 dead workers, miles of abandoned railway, half-buried steam shovels turning into jungle monuments, and a giant muddy scar across the isthmus that everyone now called the French mistake. For almost 10 years, the dream of a Panama Canal looked dead. But one country never stopped watching, the United States, and one president decided the canal was too important to give up on. His name was Theodore Roosevelt, and he was about to do whatever it took, legal or not, to make the canal American. Chapter 2. By the 1890s, the United States was changing fast. It wasn't just a country on the East Coast anymore. America now owned land in the Pacific, Hawaii, the Philippines, Guam, and Puerto Rico. After the Spanish-American War in 1898, suddenly the U.S. Navy had to protect two oceans at the same time. Moving warships from the Atlantic to the Pacific meant sailing 22,000 kilometers around South America. That took 60 to 70 days. If a war started, the fleet might arrive too late. A canal through Central America would fix that in one stroke. The trip would drop to just 8,000 kilometers and take less than 3 weeks. President Theodore Roosevelt called the canal the most important strategic need of the United States. He wanted it built, and he wanted it built right now. Two possible routes were on the table. One, Nicaragua, longer route, but the land was mostly flat, and the Nicaraguan government was ready to sign a deal. 2. Panama, shorter route, only 80 kilometers. Already had some French digging and railroad, but Panama was still part of Colombia, and Colombia kept saying no. Roosevelt's first choice was Nicaragua. Congress was ready to vote yes. Then, in May 1902, something perfect happened for the Panama Plan. A volcano in Nicaragua called Mount Momotombo erupted. Newspapers printed scary photos of lava and ash. Even though the volcano was 100 kilometers from the proposed canal route, American politicians panicked and switched their votes to Panama. At the same time, the French company that went bankrupt still owned the old equipment, railroad, and digging rights in Panama. They were desperate to sell everything before it all rusted away. Their price, $40 million, a bargain compared to starting from zero. Roosevelt sent his Secretary of State, John Hay, to Bogota to make a deal with Colombia. The offer was good. America would pay Colombia $10 million up front, plus $250,000 every year after that, and buy the French assets for $40 million. Colombia's leaders said no. They wanted more money, $25 million up front, and they wanted the yearly payments to start only after 10 years. They thought they had all the power. They were wrong. Roosevelt was furious. He called the Colombian government those Bogota bandits. In private letters, he said, if Colombia won't play fair, maybe Panama should become its own country, and that is exactly what happened next. November 3, 1903. A small group of Panamanian businessmen and doctors had been planning in secret for months. They were tired of being ignored by faraway Bogota and paying high taxes that never came back to Panama. They wanted independence, and they knew the United States would help if they moved fast. At 6 p.m. that day, the revolution started with almost no shooting. A Colombian warship was in Colon Harbor. The Panamanian rebels paid the ship's captain $8,000 in cash to keep his soldiers on board and do nothing. A few hours later, a train full of Colombian troops arrived in Colon, but the rebels had already removed the tracks outside town. The soldiers were stuck. By midnight, Panama City declared independence. The new flag went up. The Republic of Panama was born. The very next day, November 4th, the United States recognized the new country. No other nation in history had ever been recognized that fast. 2 weeks later, on November 18, 1903, the new Panamanian government signed the Habuna-Varilla Treaty with the United States. Here's what the treaty said. The United States gets full control of a 16-kilometer-wide strip of land across Panama, the canal zone, as if it were sovereign forever. America pays Panama $10 million right away and $250,000 a year starting in 1913. The U.S. can build, run, and defend the canal. American warships get to jump the line and go through for free. Panamanians celebrated at first. They finally had their own country, but many quickly realized they had traded one boss, Colombia, for a much stronger one, the United States. The canal zone became like a piece of America inside Panama, its own laws, its own police, its own money. Theodore Roosevelt later bragged, "I took the canal zone." Years after, when people criticized how it happened, he answered with one of his most famous lines, "I took the isthmus." With the land secured, the biggest question was, could the United States actually build the canal when France had failed so badly? Roosevelt knew the first job wasn't digging. It was beating the two things that killed the French, disease and bad organization. He was about to send two of the best men in America to make that happen. Chapter 3. Theodore Roosevelt knew the canal would never be built if people kept dying the way they did under the French. He gave one simple order: make the dirt fly, but first make the mosquitoes disappear. In 1904, he sent an Army engineer named John Finley Wallace as the first chief engineer. Wallace lasted only 1 year. He hated the heat, fought with suppliers, and finally quit. Next came John Frank Stevens, a railroad genius who had built tracks across the Rocky Mountains in winter. Stevens arrived in 1905 and immediately said the real enemy was not the jungle, it was sickness. Stevens hired a doctor most people had never heard of, Colonel William Crawford Gorgas. Gorgas had spent years in Cuba after the Spanish-American War. He proved that yellow fever and malaria were spread by one specific kind of mosquito, not bad air, like everyone used to think. In Havana, he wiped out yellow fever in just 18 months by killing mosquitoes. When Gorgas got to Panama, the canal zone was still a death trap. In some towns, 1 out of every 3 people caught yellow fever. Gorgas asked for money to do the same thing he did in Cuba. Drain every puddle and swamp near houses, put screens on all windows and doors, spread oil on standing water to kill mosquito eggs. Cut the grass short and clear brush, give workers free quinine pills every day. The bosses in Washington laughed at first. They thought spending millions on screens and grass cutting was crazy when they needed that money for shovels and steel. Stevens backed Gorgas 100%. He told Washington, no sanitation, no canal. Roosevelt trusted Stevens and gave Gorgas the money. By the end of 1906, the results were amazing. Yellow fever disappeared completely from the canal zone. Malaria dropped by more than 90%. Workers who used to die by the hundreds every month were now healthy enough to work full weeks. With the sickness under control, Stevens turned to the second big problem: how to actually dig the canal. The French plan, a flat sea-level canal, was impossible. Stevens made the big decision: build a lock canal instead. Ships would sail into giant locks like water elevators that would lift them 26 meters above sea level to a huge man-made lake, then lower them back down on the other side. To make that lake, they would dam the wild Chagres River at a place called Gatun. The dam would be the biggest ever built, almost a kilometer long and made of millions of tons of rock and dirt. Stevens also rebuilt the old French railroad into the best one in the world at the time. 200 kilometers of tracked brand new American locomotives, and special cars that could dump dirt in seconds. By 1907, the Americans were finally ready to start serious digging. Stevens left the job. He said the credit should go to the next man who would finish it. Roosevelt picked an Army colonel who was perfect for the biggest construction project on Earth. His name was George Washington Goethals, and he was about to run the canal zone like a military base with 40,000 workers. March 1907, Colonel George Washington Goethals steps off the ship in Colon. He is 48 years old, tall, calm, and famous for never raising his voice. People quickly learn he doesn't need to. When Goethals speaks, everyone listens. Roosevelt gave him total power. Goethals is boss of everything in the canal zone: digging, railroads, hospitals, schools, police, even the stores. No one can overrule him except the president himself. Goethals sets up 3 huge jobs and puts the best men in charge of each. 1. The Culebra Cut, today called Galliard Cut, the 14-kilometer mountain that has to be sliced down to let ships pass. 2. The giant Gatun Dam and Lake, the biggest man-made lake in the world at that time. 3. The 3 sets of locks: Gatun, Pedro, Miguel, and Miraflores, each lock chamber big enough to hold the Titanic. The biggest daily fight is in the Culebra Cut. Every morning at 7 a.m., steam whistles blow. Over 6,000 men and 160 giant steam shovels start work. Each shovel can scoop 8 tons of dirt in one bite. Trains run on 4 sets of tracks right next to the shovels. A loaded train leaves every 90 seconds, 24 hours a day. But the mountain fights back. The ground is soft clay. As soon as one side is dug, the other side slides down and fills the hole again. In 1908 alone, landslides dumped more than 2 million cubic meters of dirt back into the cut, sometimes burying shovels and tracks under 20 meters of mud. Goethals never panics. He just orders more shovels, more men, more dynamite. Workers start calling the cut the Big Slide, but they also start believing nothing can stop Goethals' life. For the workers is hard but organized. Over 40,000 people from more than 70 countries work on the canal. Most come from the Caribbean, especially Barbados and Jamaica. White American workers get paid in gold and live in nice houses. Caribbean workers get paid less in silver and live in wooden barracks. It isn't fair, but Goethals keeps the peace by running Sunday baseball leagues, free schools, and the best hospitals in Central America. By 1910, the numbers are incredible. Gatun Dam is finished, 2.3 kilometers long, holding back a lake, 164 square miles in size. The locks are rising, walls of concrete so thick a battleship could fire at them and do no damage. Culebra Cut is dropping 3 to 4 meters every month. In 1913, the last mountain in Culebra is gone. For the first time, a man can stand on one side and see clear through to the other ocean. On October 10, 1913, President Woodrow Wilson presses a button in Washington, D.C. A signal travels 4,000 kilometers by telegraph. Dynamite explodes the final thin wall in the cut. Water from Gatun Lake rushes in and meets water from the Pacific side. The two oceans are now connected by a waterway. All that is left is to finish the locks, test everything, and open the canal to the world. It is almost ready, but the opening day will bring a surprise no one expected. Chapter 4, August 15, 1914. The official opening day. A small cement steamer called the SS Ancon starts on the Atlantic side. It is decorated with flags and bunting. On board are 200 guests, a band playing music, and dozens of reporters. The ship enters the first Gatun lock at 7:30 a.m. Giant electric motors, the biggest ever built, pulled the ship forward. The huge gates close behind it with a deep boom that echoes across the jungle. Water rushes in. In just 12 minutes, the ship rises 26 meters, almost the height of a 9-story building. The band keeps playing. Cameras click. Everyone cheers. The Ancon sails across Gatun Lake, glides through the now open Culebra Cut, drops down the Pacific locks, and reaches the Pacific Ocean at 4:45 p.m. Total time, just over 9 hours. The same trip around South America would have taken 60 days. Newspapers around the world call it the greatest engineering victory in history. The final cost? $375 million, about $12 billion today. Workers moved 240 million cubic meters of earth, more than all previous canals combined. But the celebration is short. 2 weeks earlier, on June 28, 1914, a man named Gavrilo Princip shot Archduke Franz Ferdinand in Sarajevo. Europe explodes into World War I. Suddenly, no one has time to celebrate a canal. Luxury passenger ships are turned into troop transports. Trade drops. The grand opening parties are cancelled. Even worse, nature isn't finished fighting. In September 1915, only 1 year after opening, a massive landslide hits the Culebra Cut. Millions of cubic meters of mud slide into the channel and close the canal for 7 months. Ships have to go back to the old route around South America. Engineers learn a hard lesson. The canal is never finished. The soft clay keeps moving. They have to keep dredging and watching the hills 24 hours a day, every year, forever. Another problem shows up fast. The canal zone itself, it is run like an American territory. U.S. laws, U.S. police, U.S. dollars. Panamanians need a pass to enter many areas. Schools, clubs, and even some stores are separated by race and nationality. Many Panamanians start to feel like second-class citizens in their own country. By the 1920s, resentment is growing. People in Panama City start asking, why does the United States own a piece of our country forever? The canal is working perfectly and making money, but the political problems are only beginning. The canal quickly became the most important waterway on Earth. In its first full year, 1915, 1,000 ships used it. By 1929, that number was over 5,000 ships a year. A trip from New York to San Francisco now cost half as much and took 1/3 the time. Cities like Los Angeles, Seattle, and New Orleans boomed because they were suddenly much closer to Europe and Asia. The U.S. Navy loved it too. In World War I and later World War II, the canal let America move battleships and aircraft carriers from ocean to ocean in days instead of months. Military planners said the canal was worth more than an extra fleet of ships. But keeping it open was harder than anyone expected. Landslides never stopped. Between 1915 and 1930, workers removed an extra 30 million cubic meters of dirt that slid back in, almost as much as the French dug in their whole failed project. Engineers built terraces on the hillsides, planted grass and trees to hold the soil, and kept dredgers working day and night. The locks themselves needed constant care. Each lock gate weighs 700 tons, yet they open and close perfectly hundreds of times a day. The electric mules, little locomotives that pull ships through the locks, run on tracks and have to be repaired or replaced often. Money kept flowing in from ship tolls. The very first ship paid $2,000. By the 1930s, the biggest ships paid $15,000 or more. The canal was paying for itself and making a profit for the U.S. government every year. Life in the canal zone looked like small-town America in the tropics. American-style houses with screens on every window, baseball fields, movie theaters, and ice cream shops. Schools where kids said the Pledge of Allegiance every morning, and gold roll white American workers earning much more than silver roll, mostly Caribbean. Workers doing the same jobs. That unfair pay system caused anger. Caribbean workers went on strike several times in the 1920s. The strikes were stopped quickly, but the canal stayed open, but the bad feelings stayed. By the 1930s, Panama's leaders started speaking up louder. They wanted more money from the canal and more control over the zone. In 1936, President Franklin Roosevelt signed a new treaty that raised Panama's yearly payment to $430,000 and promised to treat Panamanians more fairly. But the U.S. still owned the zone in perpetuity forever. Most Americans thought that was fine. Most Panamanians did not. The seeds of future trouble were already growing. Chapter 5. By the 1950s, the Panama Canal was carrying more than 10,000 ships a year and earning hundreds of millions of dollars. Almost all of that money went to the United States. Panama got its yearly check raised again to $1.9 million in 1955, but that was tiny compared to what the canal actually made. Panamanians looked across the fence at the canal zone and saw nice American houses with green lawns and swimming pools, stores that sold everything cheap because they paid no taxes, schools and hospitals that were some of the best in Latin America, signs in English only. And Panamanian citizens, often treated like visitors in their own country, kids in Panama City grew up hearing their parents say, "The zone is ours, but we can't even walk there freely." In 1959, a group of Panamanian students decided to do something simple but powerful. They marched to the zone carrying Panama's flag. They just wanted to raise it next to the American flag at a school in the zone. US police stopped them. The students pushed forward. Fights broke out. The event made newspapers around the world and embarrassed the United States. 5 years later, on January 9, 1964, it happened again, only much worse. A group of Panamanian high school students entered the zone to raise their flag at Balboa High School. American students tried to stop them. Someone tore the Panamanian flag. Word spread fast. Thousands of Panamanians poured into the zone. Rocks were thrown. Police fired tear gas, then bullets. By the end of 3 days of rioting, 21 Panamanians dead, 4 U.S. soldiers dead. Hundreds wounded, cars and buildings burned. Panama broke diplomatic relations with the United States for a while. The whole world saw the pictures on television and asked, why does the U.S. still act like it owns part of Panama? President Lyndon Johnson realized the old treaty could not last. Secret talks began. For the next 13 years, negotiators from both countries met again and again. Panama wanted the canal back. The U.S. wanted to keep running it safely. Finally, on September 7, 1977, a new treaty was signed in Washington. D.C. President Jimmy Carter and Panama's leader, General Omar Torrijos, shook hands in front of TV cameras. The new Torrijos-Carter treaties said two big things. The canal zone would disappear on October 1, 1979. Panama would get full control of the canal at noon on December 31, 1999. Until then, the two countries would run it together, with more and more responsibility moving to Panama every year. Many Americans were angry. Some politicians said Carter was giving away the canal. In Panama, people danced in the streets. The countdown to 1999 had started. When treaty was signed, the transition wasn't smooth. For the next 20 years, the United States and Panama had to learn to work together. Thousands of American workers moved out, and Panamanian workers moved into the higher positions they had been denied for decades. But in the 1980s, a new problem appeared. A Panamanian general named Manuel Noriega took control of the country. Noriega was a dictator. He was involved in drug trafficking and stopped cooperating with the United States. Relations got so bad that the canal's safety was at risk. In December 1989, President George H.W. Bush ordered Operation Just Cause. Over 26,000 U.S. troops invaded Panama to remove Noriega. It was the largest American combat operation since the Vietnam War. Battles were fought just a few miles from the canal locks. The canal actually closed for a day, the first time it had shut down due to military action in its history. Noriega was captured, and democracy returned to Panama. The timeline for the handover got back on track. Finally, the big day arrived, December 31, 1999, at noon. A huge ceremony took place at the administration building in Balboa. It was raining, but thousands of people stood outside cheering. Former U.S. President Jimmy Carter was there. The American flag was lowered for the last time. The Panamanian flag was raised alone. For the first time in history, Panama owned 100% of its own territory. The canal zone ceased to exist. The fences came down. The state within a state was gone. Critics in America had predicted that without us engineers, the canal would fall apart or close within a year. They said Panama wasn't ready to run such a complex machine. They were wrong. Under Panamanian management, the canal didn't just survive. It became more efficient, safer, and more profitable than ever before. But the new Panamanian owners soon realized they had a massive problem. Ships were getting bigger, much bigger than the Titanic-sized locks could handle. If they didn't do something drastic, the canal would become obsolete. Chapter 6. In the early 2000s. The shipping world was changing fast. For almost a century, shipbuilders designed ships specifically to fit inside the Panama Canal's locks. These ships were called Panamax vessels. They were huge, but they had limits. 294 meters long and 32 meters wide. But global trade was exploding. China was manufacturing more goods than ever. Shipping companies wanted to carry more cargo in a single trip to save money. So, they started building monster ships called Post-Panamax or Neo-Panamax. These floating giants were as wide as football fields and could carry 3 times as much cargo as the old ships. There was just one problem. They couldn't fit in the Panama Canal. They had to go the long way around South America or through the Suez Canal in Egypt, which has no locks and can handle bigger ships. Panama started losing business. If the canal became obsolete, Panama's economy would crash. The government came up with a bold plan. Don't just fix the old canal. Build a completely new one right next to it. They proposed adding a third set of locks. These new locks would be bigger, deeper, and use completely different technology than the 1914 locks. But this project would cost $5.25 billion. That was about 25% of Panama's entire GDP at the time. It was a huge gamble. If it failed, the country could go bankrupt. Because the risk was so high, the government couldn't just decide on its own. The Constitution said the people had to decide. On October 22, 2006, Panama held a national referendum. It was a tense day. Opponents said the project was too expensive and corrupt. Supporters said it was the only way to save the future. When the votes were counted, 76% of Panamanians voted yes. The expansion was on. The plan was incredible. Dig 2 massive new channels at both ends of the canal. Build 2 giant lock complexes, one on the Atlantic, one on the Pacific. Instead of traditional gate doors like the ones from 1914 that swing open, use giant sliding gates that roll out of the wall. Use water-saving basins to recycle 60% of the fresh water, so the new locks wouldn't drain Gatun Lake dry. Work began in 2007. The goal was to finish by 2014, the 100th anniversary of the original canal. It was supposed to be a perfect celebration. It didn't work out that way. The project ran into billion-dollar arguments, cracks in the concrete, and strikes that stopped everything. The project was massive, and the problems were just as big. The construction was led by a group of international companies called geopolitical. By 2014, tensions between the builders and the Panama Canal Authority were at a breaking point. The builders claimed the concrete and digging were more difficult than expected. They demanded an extra $1.6 billion to finish the job. Panama said no. They pointed to the contract and said, "A deal is a deal." In February 2014, the exact year the canal was supposed to be finished, work ground to a halt. Thousands of workers were sent home. The giant construction sites went silent. It looked like the French mistake was happening all over again. After 2 weeks of intense arguments, they finally made a deal to keep going. The work resumed, but the deadline was pushed back by 2 years. Then came the engineering challenge. The new lock gates were too big to be built in Panama. They had to be built in Italy and shipped across the Atlantic Ocean on special barges. These gates are monsters. Some are 30 meters tall and weigh over 4,000 tons. Unlike the old miter gates that swing like doors, these slide on tracks. By 2015, the locks were built and ready for testing. Engineers flooded the chambers to see if they held water. They didn't. Photos leaked online showing water spraying through the concrete walls of the new Pacific locks. It was a PR disaster. Critics screamed that the concrete was low quality. The engineers didn't panic. They drilled into the walls, inserted steel reinforcement, and patched the leaks. Retesting showed the locks were solid. Finally, on June 26, 2016, the expanded canal opened to the world. A giant Chinese container ship, renamed the Costco Shipping Panama, was chosen to make the first trip. Crowds waved Panamanian flags as the massive ship slid into the new locks with only centimeters to spare on each side. The expansion was a success. The canal could now handle 96% of the world's container ships. The capacity of the waterway doubled overnight, but the story isn't over. Today, the Panama Canal faces an enemy that no amount of concrete or dynamite can defeat. It isn't a foreign army or a lack of money. It is the weather itself. The water that powers the locks is disappearing, and the canal is facing its most dangerous crisis yet. Chapter 7. Here is the simple truth that threatens the entire operation. The Panama Canal runs on rain. Unlike the Suez Canal, which is just a ditch at sea level filled with ocean water, Panama is a water bridge. Remember, ships have to be lifted 26 meters up to Gatun Lake to cross the mountains. Gravity moves the water to lift the ships, but the cost is incredibly high. Every single ship that passes through the canal uses about 200 million liters, 50 million gallons of fresh water from the lake. Once the ship goes down the locks on the other side, that fresh water flushes out into the salty ocean. It is lost forever. For 100 years, this wasn't a big problem because Panama is one of the wettest countries on Earth. The rain always refilled the lake, but the climate is changing. In 2019, and again in 2023 and 2024, massive droughts hit Central America. A weather pattern called El Niño caused the rain to stop. The sun beat down on Gatun Lake, and the water level began to drop fast. It got so low that the biggest ships, the ones the new expansion was built for, couldn't go through, fully loaded. They would scrape the bottom. The Panama Canal Authority had to make a tough choice. They had to tell shipping companies, carry less cargo, or wait. They also had to cut the number of daily crossings. Usually 36 to 38 ships cross every day. During the worst of the drought, that number dropped to 24 or fewer. A massive traffic jam formed in the ocean. At one point, over 160 ships were anchored off the coast, waiting weeks to get a slot. Some companies paid up to $4 million just for a jump-the-line ticket at an auction. The world realized something scary. A lack of rain in a tiny tropical country could empty grocery store shelves in New York and close factories in China. Panama realized they cannot rely on the weather anymore. they need a new solution, and fast. The problem facing the canal is simple: there isn't enough fresh water to keep up with global trade. When they built the original canal, engineers created a massive reservoir by damming the Chagres River. This created Gatun Lake. But today, Gatun Lake has two jobs: lift the ships. This is the canal's job. Provide drinking water. This is the Panamanian people's job. The population of Panama City is growing, and they take water from the same lake that runs the canal. During a drought, the water managers have to choose. Do we prioritize the ships that bring in billions of dollars for the country, or do we prioritize the drinking water for the citizens? The law says, citizens come first. The Panama Canal Authority has been forced to look for new water sources. For years, they have argued about one simple solution: drill a hole in the mountains. There is another massive river system called the Indio River, located a few miles west of the canal. It flows straight into the Atlantic Ocean. Engineers want to build a dam on the Indio River, creating a huge new reservoir. Then, they would dig a 5-mile-long tunnel through the mountains to pump that water into Gatun Lake. This project is a massive undertaking. It would cost billions of dollars and take years. It would also flood thousands of acres of jungle and force hundreds of local people to relocate their homes. It is an environmental and political nightmare. But without the Indio River project, the canal's future is bleak. By 2050, the demand for water will be 50% higher than the supply, even in a normal rainy year. The canal will be forced to operate at half capacity, costing the country hundreds of millions of dollars a year. And the government finally made the difficult decision. They approved the study for the Indio River project. It will be the first time a major dam is built in Panama since Gatun Lake was created over a century ago. It is the only way to guarantee the water supply. The Panama Canal is the greatest engineering marvel in the Americas. It cut the world in half and powered global trade for a century. It survived disease, political corruption, revolutions, dictators, and a massive expansion. Today, the fight continues. Not against men with shovels or foreign armies, but against the unstoppable force of climate change. The future of the canal, and of Panama's economy, now depends on whether it can win the most difficult battle yet: the battle for water.